Hi, our group will be educating the class on hydrogen, which is the simplest element known to exist. And hydrogen has one proton and one electron. And is it considered to be renewable? Well, hydrogen, when produced by renewable sources like wind and solar power, it is considered to be renewable, but there are other sources out there that say it can be non-renewable as well. And is the first element on the periodic table and considered to be the most abundant of all elements.
Hydrogen has been on this earth ever since the earth existed, but it wasn't produced as a gas until 1671 by a man named Robert Boyle. Before I go on, I'm going to talk a little bit about his background. Robert was an Anglo-Irish natural philosopher, chemist, and physicist. He is considered the first modern chemist and one of the founders of modern chemistry. He was the first to produce hydrogen while experimenting with iron and acids, but it wasn't actually recognized as a distinct element up until 1766 by a man named Henry Cavendish. Henry is a British natural philosopher, scientist, and an important experimental and theoretical chemist and physicist. Henry's most famous contribution to science was the discovery and description of the properties of hydrogen and its status as a constituent element in water. Now, going back and adding on to what Harjo said, hydrogen does not stand on its own. It likes to bond with other elements to form compounds. You cannot find hydrogen alone. It is always bonded to some sort of element, like oxygen, to form water.
Now we're going to talk about the background info for hydrogen and what it's been previously used for. It's been used for welding purposes. Some rocket fuel and some NASA scientists have been using hydrogen as a source of fuel. And it's also been used, as you guys probably learned in U.S. history, for the hydrogen bomb, which is highly explosive. And it's also been used in vehicles that run off of hydrogen. So like instead of gasoline, there's hydrogen-based vehicles that use hydrogen instead of gasoline.
So during the first step, the hydrogen molecules are split into protons and electrons in the reaction layer, and then in step two, the protons move through the membrane.
And in step 3, electrons can take an alternative route to the lower layer. And in step 4, oxygen molecules are split and combined with protons and electrons to form water in the lower reaction layer.
When people use hydrogen, a fuel cell is required, and a lot of times people will compare fuel cells to batteries. And a similarity they have is that they both convert chemical energy into electricity, but the difference is that fuel cells will last as long as there is fuel, and in this case that would be hydrogen and oxygen. And for a battery, there is a lifespan, so the more you use it, the quicker it'll die.
All right, so we're going over some pros and cons of hydrogen as a fuel source. Hydrogen is renewable and abundant, and it has a lot of energy for various reasons. It's readily available. It takes some work to get, but there's nothing as inexhaustible as hydrogen in the universe, so it doesn't run out like other fuel that we use. It's also clean. Its only byproduct is water. It's non-toxic, which makes it very irregular because most fuel sources can be pretty toxic, like nuclear energy, coal, and they're all dangerous, or it's hard to use them in a safe way. Hydrogen is also more powerful than fossil fuels. It's extremely proficient, and it's effective enough to drive spaceships and more secure than using other types of fuel to do the same thing. It is 3 times as powerful as useful as gas comparable fossil fuels, which means that you're using much less of it in order to do more. So to go to the cons, hydrogen energy is expensive, and it takes a considerable amount of work to free it from its other components that are undesirable. And hydrogen can be very hard to transport, while oil is pushed through pipes and coal can be conveyed in dump trucks. It's harder to transport hydrogen, which is light, in a smart way. There's not enough hydrogen fuel stations that have been constructed, so it's harder to get than regular fuel sources. Hydrogen has a lower density than gasoline, so it has to be stored in the liquid state at low temperatures to maintain its effectiveness as a fuel source. So hydrogen needs to be stored and transported under high pressure, which makes transport and widespread use of hydrogen not feasible. And altogether, it has some safety concerns because it has a lot of power, and if there were to be an accident, there's a lot more energy that could be released and hurt people. So going over some of the environmental effects of using hydrogen as a fuel source, the only byproduct of using hydrogen as a fuel source is clean water, which you can drink. And on some of the NASA missions, the astronauts actually drank the water that was the byproduct that fueled the rockets. And if hydrogen is produced using plants fueled by fossil fuels or non-renewable resources that produce CO2, CO2 is technically a byproduct of the hydrogen reaction. Okay, so we're just basically going to go over some of the ways that hydrogen as an energy source can be improved. It can be improved by improving the initial startup costs, so making it cheaper to start up a way to produce hydrogen and use it as a fuel source. Basically, because it's expensive to start up and buy everything that you need to do it. So if we can make that cheaper, that would really help. And making it easier to transport, because that is one of the hardest things about hydrogen, is that it contains a lot of energy and it has to be stored under high pressure, so it's very hard to transport. And if there was an easier way to transport it, it would really make it an easier energy resource to use.
Overall, hydrogen has many positive aspects to it, such as its fuel efficiency and how it is a clean energy fuel, which we covered earlier in the video. It is a very abundant material that is all around us. Right now, hydrogen is not used nearly as much as it should be. Hydrogen has the potential to be used in running the entire country on its energy source, as well as run the whole world. This renewable energy source has a bright future ahead of it, and many people would benefit, especially in areas of poverty, once the initial cost of creating this energy source decreases. Hopefully everyone learned something today and agrees with the positive future this energy source can have.